Welcome, everyone. Today it's my pleasure to welcome Todd Arkyn, author of From Beneath the Ice, a tale of struggle and triumph with PTSD and mental illness. Todd has been symptom-free for 196 days so far. So welcome, Todd.
Hi.
Thanks
Good to
so
be
much.
here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the background of the book and sort of what motivated you to write it, and then also a little bit about your history with mental illness.
Yeah, that'll be easy answer because the book is essentially a memoir of my life from an early childhood where I was subjected to verbal and abuse and also locked in a closet for days on end. And a very negative experience, very traumatic, that left me with a very negative mindset going forward. I excelled in school and graduated with 3 degrees and, went on to a good career, but that was all interrupted very quickly by the onset of schizophrenia when I was 25. And, just my life unraveled. I was homeless, living in the wilderness for quite some time. I could not string anything together in my life for quite some time. And then it wasn't until about 6 years ago I started making changes. And they say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And that was it for me. I had everybody in my life tell me what I should do. And it wasn't until I decided what the best choices were that's when real change happened. So, and that goes all the way through from everyday decisions to taking medication to exercising to all of it. That's when the real change started.
What did your career start off as before the symptoms really?
I was a biochemist for a large pharmaceutical company.
I see. And so you went to school. That was your part of your degree or your school?
Yeah, I studied chemistry and biology and applied mathematics, and then graduated and went right into that. So, there was a void left with my childhood, and for a long time I poured bad relationships and school and work and running and everything else into that void. And it wasn't until somewhat recently, actually, when I first sat down to write my book, was one of the first times I really sat in that void by myself and explored everything that had happened and looked at all the ugly bits of myself and accepted them for the first time. So that was a big difference in the way my mind thought of everything that had happened up until now.
And at what point did you realize you could no longer continue with your career as a biochemist? What kind of led up to that?
Well, there was a couple things. I mean, I got pretty tired with the travel, so I went into a different path. I had signed a non-competitive agreement, so I had to go to a different industry. I was still doing chemistry, but in a different realm, other than pharmaceuticals. And there was less travel because I had a young family. I had 2 young girls at home. And even that, one of my big regrets has always been that I did not spend a lot of time with my family. I was still, from my childhood, really kept everybody at a distance. And it's not an excuse for bad behavior. It's just the way I reacted to everything at the time. So for a long time, I pushed everybody away. I mean, I was running 100-mile weeks back then. And to put that in perspective, you run 30 miles on one day, you still have 70 miles to run over the next 6 days. And that takes up a lot of time, especially when you have a full-time job. So you get home and you leave and you run until 9 o'clock at night, and then you go to bed and start the next day doing the same thing. So I regret not spending a lot of time with my family. I can never get that back, but I was operating on a system that I was given as a child that was dysfunctional, and yeah, I did the best I could, and I've made vast corrections since then. But it's a journey in my book that describes how I went from illness to wellness, and that transition certainly manifested itself in the writing process.
And what was the point? Your book is mostly, your first book anyway, is mostly about your experience of being on the road. A lot of it is, and what was the kind of initial trigger or impetus for you to go ahead and be on the road or be homeless for those 4 or 5 years?
Well, I initially when my schizophrenia came on, I was back then, I'm dating myself here, but that was really in the baby stages of the internet. There wasn't a lot out there as far as information. There was no Google or things like that. So I really didn't have a lot of resources as for what was happening to me. And I really struggled trying to wrestle with the fact that I was going to be, locked in an institution forever. Like, the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or something was like one of my main references because there just wasn't a lot. So I didn't tell anyone what was happening to me. So to everybody in my life, I was this successful scientist that ran all the time and was really healthy. And all of a sudden that just unraveled and I didn't do anything anymore, and I acted erratically to things that weren't in the room. And, it was just really bizarre characteristics that seemed to come out of nowhere for everyone. And I had a suicide attempt in 2005. And that came about largely because I had a pretty insidious voice that was just berating me endlessly and telling me horrible things for most of a day, like 12 hours, and I just wanted the voice to stop. So uh, obviously I was unsuccessful, thankfully. And after that was placed in a number of group homes. And I'm going to dance around this a little bit because it's a pivotal point in the book and I don't want to spoil it, but I encountered another schizophrenic. Now, I still had not told anybody what was actually happening to me. So when I encountered her, she was acting like I was, but much more vocal about what was happening to her. She was discharged from the group home and did something really horrible. And it scared me to the point where I thought, well, if she can do that, I can do that. So I just left society altogether. And looking back, I know that, I get asked a lot about my backpacking trip. It was not a glamorous thing at all. It was horrific because I thought, if I can walk for a year, it ended up being 5 years, but if I can walk for a year, maybe all this stuff will just go away. And it did not. If anything, it got worse because everything that was in my head came right with me out there. And I had no resource. Like if I was sitting in the living room with my family and somebody walked in and started throwing balls at the wall, I could look at them, and if they didn't react, I knew it was in my head. But when I was out in the woods, I had nobody to do that with. I was by myself. So it was even more difficult. Knowing what I know now, I know that going to a hospital and actually telling somebody what was going on would have been a much better choice. Back then I used the analogy with as far as me not telling anybody what was going on with my schizophrenia. It's kind of like going to the doctor with a broken leg, but telling him your neck hurts. You're not going to get the care. Your leg's not going to get better. So, that's a big thing. I work with people a lot all day long, and I tell them you got to be honest with your care team because you're not going to get the help you need. And it's hard. People don't want to admit weakness, especially men. I struggle with that a lot. So it's important for your care team and for your own mental health to tell everybody what's actually going on. So that was kind of the impetus that led me out into the wilderness. Um, there were some moments of it that were meaningful in a positive way, but they were kind of fleeting. Most of it was pretty scary.
Yeah, you have quite a few tales and adventures in the wilderness. And I was curious, did you have a backpacking or wilderness background before you started off, or what was your
No, I
training?
made no, I made pretty regular trips once a week to the library when I was in the group home and kind of keyed in on that for whatever reason. And then when that happened with the other schizophrenic, I knew where my path was because I had been reading these survival manuals for several months. So again, there I wouldn't recommend that. And there's even a warning in my book about cautioning people to do that because it's dangerous. I almost died several times. So um, and a lot can happen out there. So you gotta think about what you're doing.
One of those times was when you were out, I believe, which you were in the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho, I believe,
Yeah.
and you had something a little scary happen, and I wonder if you could read us a little segment from your book about that
Yeah.
situation.
I was in the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho. That's where I spent my first winter. And I actually didn't even have a tent. I was, building shelters and things. So I have bookmarks here, so you'll have to excuse those because yeah, actually, when I read this for the podcast, I hadn't read these sections in a while, so I wanted to make sure I read back through what I needed to read. So
So could we see the cover real quick, just to see
yeah.
what the cover looks like? There it is. So the tale we're about to hear is from the cover, inspired by the cover, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, the title of the book was inspired by this event. So yeah. This is chapter 19, Down. What does not kill me makes me stronger. Friedrich Nietzsche. There were about 8 inches of fresh snow from the night before. The snow was glistening in the light of the morning as if each snowflake was shimmering to guide my way. It made the trek seem very serene and scenic. It was a bright, sunny day, and for a change, I was feeling pretty good and free of symptoms. I trudged through the woods, being careful and measured with my steps. I didn't want to sprain an ankle with all the unseen brush on the forest floor beneath me. After what seemed like about an hour, I came to a clearing. I started across and was about halfway to the tree line on the other side when suddenly I heard a loud, resounding ricochet that seemed to travel right out from underneath. I suddenly realized I was standing on ice. I took a few sharp but measured breaths of the cold air. Another thunderous crack shattered the silence around me. I immediately unbuckled the chest and waist straps of my pack and was about to take it off and lay flat when the ground beneath me gave way and I abruptly fell through the ice. I broke through with my 50-pound pack still on. I swear my heart stopped from the shock. I was trying not to panic. The staggering jolt of the freezing water tore into my body like sharp blades of glass. My feet weren't touching the bottom. I tried to take a deep breath, but only managed a shuddering gasp. The icy water gripped me like a full-body vice. I managed to get out of my pack and push it up onto the ice. That pack was my life. It had everything in it I needed to survive. I knew that if I lost it, I would be as good as dead. I took a few deep breaths, making sure to keep my limbs moving as much as possible. I pushed my pack forward onto the ice and while kicking with my legs, pulled myself up little by little, using my pack as a counterweight. Time seemed to stop and what was probably only a minute or two seemed like forever. My legs were going numb and as I was tiring incredibly quickly. I could feel my heart racing against my ribs at a frenetic pace. I had to keep going. I felt very heavy with my winter clothes weighing me down. I had run marathons, but this was far more excruciating. I was completely exhausted, struggling even to breathe or kick. Finally, I was out.
Wow, that's chilling, so to speak, story. And how far were you from getting help at that point? Was it possible to walk out to a road nearby and flag
um,
someone down?
the Sawtooth are very remote. I would think that it would probably be at least a 2-day hike before I came into any sort of civilization. There were
Wow.
times I went 40 or 60 days without seeing a car or a person or anything. So
Wow.
it's pretty remote up there.
Wow. So you were very, very remote.
Hmm.
And after you got out, how did you keep yourself from freezing to death?
Well, I always carry a bundle inside my pack at the top in a dry bag that's got like kindling and tinder and something to start a fire with, because the amount of time I was out there, you can't have lighters. I mean, you can, but they run out of fluid. So I, had to use a flint and all that kind of stuff, which I got pretty good at. The first thing I did was actually take off like all my clothes except my underwear, because the the wet clothes will insulate the cold against your skin. It seems like something that you wouldn't want to do, but thermally it makes sense. So I did that and stood there in my boots and got a fire going pretty quick, and then just let everything dry out and carried on.
Were you wearing synthetic fabric or cotton or?
Yeah, I don't even really remember. By that time I had been out for almost, a year, and
Mhm.
I think I had some base layers of
Yeah.
like mixed blends, but you keep in mind I was coming from a group home, so it wasn't like shopping at REI or anything to gear myself up. I had a pretty nice water purifier, but everything else was just kind of patched together.
How did you cook when you were out there? Open fire?
Yeah, I ate a lot of rabbits and a lot of things that would probably turn people away from this video, but uh, I ate a lot of greens, wild plants, and rabbits, fish, things like that.
And how did you learn about which plants were safe to eat?
I had a wildlife book with me, a wild plant book with me. It was kind of hard with my color blindness to tell certain things, but for the most part, I could tell just by looking at the leaves and things like that. But even with that, I was pretty careful, just because, the amount of calories you get from plants are not anything you can really sustain yourself with. So there's a risk there of, poisoning yourself that is not worth it. It's almost better to just wait a day until you actually get a rabbit or a fish and get more calories that way.
Mhm. Which book was it? The plant book?
Um, wow. I don't know. It was
Well,
like 20 years ago.
yeah. Well, if
I honestly don't
if
remember.
once we if we'll put that in the show notes for folks, if once
Yeah.
if we get that information, that'd be curious
If
which
I
one
could
it
if I
was.
could like see the cover, I probably could
Yeah,
tell you which
yeah,
one it was, but I can't remember the name of it.
yeah. No worries. We'll add that to the show notes later. So after Northern California, you walked. Oh, I want to mention that too. First of all, it's just you pretty, except for a brief hitchhiking time with a truck, you pretty much walked all the way from the Midwest. You were walking most of the time, right? Or was it a combination of hitchhiking and
Yeah, no, I never hitchhiked. I happened to get a ride from a truck driver in
uh,
Nebraska that took me to Idaho, but that was really the only ride I got. I never hitchhiked. Was a little too afraid to do that.
mm-hmm.
But I walked for 5 years,
Yeah.
8, 10 miles a day. So yeah,
Starting
built up a
in,
good foundation for ultra marathons, I
yeah,
guess.
sure. And which state did you start in walking?
Wisconsin
Wisconsin. You literally walked from Wisconsin to California and
to
then
New
back.
Mexico and Utah and yeah, all over the place. I
Wow.
never really went east, but I covered a pretty vast majority of the West, including all of Kansas. So if you've ever driven through Kansas, I walked the whole state west to east. And that, I've told people before, if I didn't have a mental illness by then, I probably would have by the time I finished that state, because that was pretty maddening. There was not a lot going on every day.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking thousands of miles. Do you have any
Uh,
idea?
no, I don't.
Uh,
I didn't have any kind of
yeah, that's just
way to track
amazing.
that.
Yeah. So back to Death Valley. Now
Yeah,
we're this is one of the stories I found most compelling in the book, and yeah.
yeah. This is from chapter 22, The Scorpion. Half asleep and extremely thirsty, I slowly turned to reach for my water bottle. Suddenly, I felt an excruciating stabbing pain in my left bicep. I tore open my sleeping bag to discover a rather large bark scorpion lodged in my armpit. He immediately tried to crawl away, so I quickly grabbed my knife and stabbed him to the ground. I fought the urge to panic. I took several deep breaths. I knew I needed to slow my heart rate, which would decelerate the spread of the venom. I also grabbed a bandana and made a tourniquet above the sting. Thankfully, I had been using several for sunscreen and had one handy. With one last deep breath, I reluctantly ate the scorpion raw. I had read about a Native American tracker who said that most venomous creatures contain an antidote to their own venom. The secret was you had to eat them raw. I didn't have time to wonder if what I had read was true, so I cut off the stinger and wolfed it down. It was absolutely deplorable and probably the most horrible thing I had ever had in my mouth. I had eaten spiders, bugs, and other vile creatures, but this was by far the worst. Despite my quick reaction, within 30 minutes, I was starting to feel increasingly ill. Since I was wide out in the open, I had previously set up my tent and put a tarp off to the side of it. This allowed me to lay open next to my tent and put a tarp and be in the shade. I was evaluating my water situation, about half a cup, when I started vomiting. I was already parched and sunbaked from days in the desert and knew this would further exacerbate my dehydration. Despite my situation, I was trying to be conservative and took the smallest of sips. I nibbled on dry rice for strength and hoped it would calm my stomach. After about an hour, I was having involuntary convulsions and my fever had spiked. Eventually, I started losing consciousness. What seemed like seconds were most likely hours, possibly days, and vice versa. I would close my eyes in the searing noonday sun, only to open them a second later, and it was the middle of the night. In those moments between wakefulness and unconsciousness, I contemplated my death. Fading thoughts would drift in and out of my mind like waves crashing on the shore. Who would find me out here? Would there be enough left of me to tell who I was? Should I carve a message from in my arm for my kids? What should I say? I had lucid images of eventually being found, but all that was left were bones. There were some lingering notions of sinew or tendon, but most of what had made me me had long been taken away. In all my life, what had I added up to? This thought lingered in the trenches of despair in my mind. Darkness is all around us, lurking around every corner. In every new moment, there is an option for the universe to sweep in and whisk its life away. As quick as a final sharp breath drawn in through clenched teeth, we are gone. Lifetimes passed before me as I lay there minute to minute, one breath at a time. As I lay there under the desert sky, the hallucinations came, vast star landscapes and diaphanous planets. Distances between myself and everyone I had ever known grew very short and then very long. My children cried. I cried. My world disappeared and came back again. I was in and out of consciousness for several days and nights. As the fever from the venom raged within me, my thoughts rumbled away like the lowest notes on a piano, dissonant and callous, indifferent like impending thunder. I turned inward.
Wow. Very powerful. You have a
Thank
real
you.
knack for communicating in eloquent words, but
I
that
got to give
experience,
some to my wife because she was my editor and really added a lot to the story. But it was a really incredible experience working together on that at the end. So that was the
Yeah, it really flows well. So again, I assume you were, a day's walk from any help at this
oh
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And weren't able to get to medical attention. And so eventually, what happened as far as the recovering from that?
Well, I mean, I eventually started to feel better and gradually, I don't really know how long it took. It could have been a week, it could have been 3 days. I'm not really sure because I was going in and out. Uh, but I was drinking my own urine because I didn't have enough water. Um, and just gradually started feeling better and better, and eventually got to the point where I was actually resting a bit and just, being somewhat active around where I was, and then decided to hike out of there.
What were you doing for water when you were out there?
It made a solar still, so kind of like how water condenses on the outside of a can of Coke on a summer day. You can pull moisture right from thin air, especially in an environment like Death Valley, because it does get very hot during the day, but it does get pretty cold at night. So there's like a 40 to 60 degree temperature shift. So I'm a little leery about describing exactly how to do that. Uh, Legals advise me some things not to describe specifics,
Yeah.
but you can look it up if you want. But you can get a half cup to a cup of water a day, depending on that temperature change.
And that was enough to keep you going.
Yeah, it was just barely.
Amazing. Yeah. Wow. And then from there, you went on to Utah, right? To Canyonlands National
Well,
Park.
not directly. No, I was down in Arizona and New Mexico for a while.
Mm-hmm.
In New Mexico was I spent some time on the Hopi Indian Reservation, and that was a very meaningful experience for me. But yeah, I found myself in the Canyonlands area, also known as the Maze
Mm-hmm.
in Utah. And if you look at like an aerial photograph, it looks like somebody just drew a random maze in the dirt with their finger, and it's like endless. So that's where I was. That's where this next reading is from, chapter 25, Upon These Wings. I was still constantly haunted by hallucinations and voices, and tormented with guilt. The canyons in this area are at least 3 to 6 hours by ATV from the ranger station. It is strongly recommended that hikers and visitors use a map to reach the area. I found out much later that GPS units frequently lead people astray, so a compass was questionable at best. There are no services or food or gas inside the maze. I knew it was not much of a plan, but it was what I had at the moment. Before long, I was completely lost. In a way, the feeling was somewhat liberating. I had fish, water, and shelter on my back. After what had felt like a couple of weeks, I decided it was time to move on, so I set my goal to find my way out. The canyons turned, forked, and seemed impossibly endless. I wandered around for more than another week before starting to become a little distraught. I was sitting on a large boulder and looked up to see a hawk circling above where the canyon split. He was flying over the gorge to the left. It felt like a sign, so I gathered my gear and followed him slowly in that direction. After a while, the canyon split again, but this time the hawk was hovering to the right side. I followed again. This continued for what seemed like hours and on into the next day. Even as night fell, something was calling me to keep going and adhere to his path. As I rounded one long turn down the next ravine, to my astonishment and delight, I found myself out of the maze. I was in complete awe. Again, I felt deeply connected to all that was around me. I resonated with the unity amongst living things in a way you can't get from reading books. You must become one with everything out there, living through it. I felt part of something much larger than I ever had before. I made camp and tattooed the hawk on my arm by the light of my fire that night.
What has led most recently up to your congratulations, by the way, on being
Thanks.
196 days symptom
Yeah.
free? That's fantastic. And what what would you say have been kind of the main contributors to that? It's helped you in
There's
your journey.
there's four. Um, and before I tell you what the four are, I will say it was a lot of hard work, like minute to minute hard work of mental, just fortitude and determination. I wanted to quit so many times, and there is no shortcut and there's no magic bullet. You just got to do the work, and that's the plain truth. The first step was getting serious about staying on my meds. and working with my doctor to get the best possible quality of life. Again, I had people telling me my whole life, hey, you got to take your meds, but it didn't stick until I decided I had to take my meds. And once I decided, then, I'm that kind of person that if I get determined about something, I mean, that maybe that's what makes me a good ultra runner, but I do it until it's done. The second step was meeting my wife, and I'll say that this was important not because we fell in love, although that's very wonderful, but it was important to have a supportive person in my life that I trusted and shared the first time all my fears and vulnerabilities and things like that, because I had never done that before. I kept everybody at a distance. And we were friends for a couple of weeks before anything actually happened. And you don't need a romantic person. It could be a neighbor or a dentist, or it could be anybody. It's just somebody that supports you in a way that lets you be the best version of yourself. And in that, tells you the hard things. I mean, if you have a good friend that wants to support you and they're always just sprinkling sunshine on you, that'll help you up to a certain point. But at some point, you need somebody that says, hey, you could have done a little bit better with this situation, or you could have tried a little bit harder not to do what you did, or, say what you said. So she would tell me those hard things. And coming from a verbally abusive childhood, that was very hard for me to hear any sort of criticism like that, or even if it was constructive. But I took it after some work mentally. I took that as she's trying to help me be better, and she's doing this out of love. So those were the first two, the medication and meeting her. The third one, ironically enough, was writing the book. It started as journaling, and it evolved. I would tell people these stories of my life, and they go, oh my God, you gotta write a book about this. So that seed had already been planted. And when I started it, I never really had, when I actually fervently decided to write the book, I still wasn't really thinking about publishing it. I just wanted to write it and write my story and share it with my wife and my bonus daughter and maybe my kids, But again, when I decide to do something, I go all out. I have trouble multitasking, but I'm very good at one thing at a time. I can't do anything else, but I can do that very well. And so I sat for over a year for 8 to 10 hours a day, just reliving my past word by word by word. And it was an incredibly difficult, probably the most difficult thing I've ever done, because I was reliving all those traumas, not just my backpacking trip, but my childhood and, not being there for my kids and then walking away from them. I mean, I was going through all that over and over again for over a year, 8 to 10 hours a day. And when I finished, then I shared that experience in the editing process with Leslie, my wife, and that brought us even closer together because we went back and forth and shared different things we thought needed to be in there, worked on more, and then I would go and write for a while, and then we'd edit again. It was a very positive experience. But out of that, I gained more acceptance and forgiveness and self-awareness than from any other event in my life. And I've been to a lot of therapy and everything else, but that experience, writing that book, really changed the way my brain was thinking. And in that, during that process, and then certainly every day after, I was making, because I had a lot of worst case scenario thinking about the future, and I had a lot of regretful thinking about the past. I was everywhere except exactly where I was mentally, and had a very negative loop going in my head about failure and all these things. So I started reversing those thought patterns 1 second at a time. Just every time my mind started to go there, I'd say, choose love, or be the best version of yourself, or whatever I had to do to get back into positive. And I just reinforced that all day long, every day. And eventually that pattern reset itself, and now it's very positive. The final thing was running. And I think looking back, I think it's a combination of all these things, but the running was the final thing that tipped the needle. I was at about 40 to 45 miles a week. And it was an odd thing. Like the first thing I did was I said to Leslie, I said, I want to run a marathon for my birthday. Not like my birthday's in November. So I want to run like a marathon, but not in an official race. I just want to do it like by myself out on the roads or whatever. So that was the first goal. So I'm running training for that. And then I thought, well, maybe I could do, maybe I could do an ultra, 52 miles for my 52 years and do that privately. And so then that's when my running went up to 70 miles a week. The reason why I was thinking about doing these races privately was because, I was still having symptoms. So on any given day, I never knew if I was going to even be able to go outside. So signing up for an official race and being around all those people and cheering, that was too much. And then my symptoms went away. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll join an official race. So I did. So I have a 100-mile race coming up in January. So
Wow, where's
yeah,
that going to be?
it's going to be in Lakeland, Florida, and that'll be a lot of fun. And then I got partially sponsored to run a race in Scotland, which is going to be like running on another planet. It's a 75-mile race through the Isle of Skye, and
Wow.
if you look at pictures of the Isle of Skye, it looks like Venus or something. It's amazing. So I'm pretty honored. I skipped the waiting list and all that for that one. So I'm pretty honored they picked me.
Great.
And that'll be a lot of fun.
And how old are you now?
51.
51. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. It sounds like it's just an amazing story, series of stories, and just so inspiring for many of us who have struggled with mental health. And I really, really appreciate your inspiring story, for all of the energy and effort that you took to write the book that is now helping so many people and inspiring so many people. If people wanted to get a copy of your book, where would they find it?
It's on Amazon. You can either type in the search bar on Amazon, you can type in From Beneath the Ice, or you can actually type in my name, Todd Arkyn Crush, and it'll come right up. I also have an Audible version and a Kindle version on Amazon. I also do sell signed copies, and you can reach me on Facebook just with my name and send me a message, and I'll send one out to you, work out the details. If you do send me a message, be patient. I get like 200 a day. So this takes me a little while to get all the way to the bottom.
Great. And we'll put those links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And fantastic. Just thank you again, Todd, so much. It's
You're
been
welcome.
an honor speaking with you, and look forward to just keeping track and seeing where your journeys take you. And really, it's really a pleasure to have you on today. So,
absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you.
All right. You too. Thanks.
Thanks.